My name is Diana Mercer. I'm 36 years old. And on the afternoon of my daughter's 7th birthday party, my husband walked through our front door with a woman I had never been introduced to, smiled at me from across the room, and said, "Diana, this is Lauren. She's a colleague. We were just finishing up some work things. 22 people in our backyard. Pink balloons. A unicorn theme. My daughter in a tutu she had picked out herself, spinning in circles near the dessert table. And on that dessert table, under a white box that I had placed there 40 minutes earlier, a cake. Not the cake my husband was expecting. He didn't know that yet. He was still smiling. I smiled back. Said, "So glad you could make it, Lauren. I've heard so much about you." That last part was true. I had heard quite a lot about Lauren, just not from him. Before I tell you what was written on that cake, take a moment to like this video if you've ever smiled at someone while knowing exactly what was coming. Subscribe if you want to hear more. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. I genuinely want to know who's out there today. Now let me take you back. Because the cake was not the beginning. The cake was the end of something that started much earlier, in the quiet, ordinary way that the worst things always do. I met Thomas Mercer when I was 26. He was 30, an account director at an advertising firm downtown. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming, the kind of party where you end up in the kitchen because the kitchen always has the best conversations. He was leaning against the counter explaining why a particular print campaign had failed to a group of 3 people who were all trying to look like they understood what he was talking about. I understood what he was talking about. I had a marketing degree and 3 years of brand strategy work behind me. I walked over and said, "The problem was the demographic targeting was off by about 8 years in each direction." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Exactly." Nobody wanted to admit it. We talked for 2 hours. He was sharp and self-deprecating and genuinely interested in what I had to say, which was the thing I noticed most. Not performing interest. Actually interested. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered things from 20 minutes earlier in the conversation and connected them to new things. We went to dinner the following Friday. We were engaged 2 years later. Married at 29. I want to tell you about the first years because I think they matter. Because this is not a story about a bad marriage that finally collapsed. This is a story about a good marriage that was good until it changed, and about how long it takes to understand that something you trusted has become something else while you weren't watching. Our first apartment was small. 3rd floor walk-up. 1 bathroom. A kitchen where 2 people had to coordinate movement or they'd run into each other at the refrigerator. We cooked together on Sunday evenings, elaborate recipes that took too long and turned out imperfectly and were more enjoyable for the effort than the result. We had a joke about the Coke oven that took 4 hours and came out slightly wrong that we referenced for years. Our daughter Lily was born when I was 31. Thomas was in the room. He cried, the full kind, not the polite kind, and when they put her on my chest he sat beside us with his hand on my back and said something I'm not going to write here because it belongs to that room and that moment and no other. Lily was a good baby, alert and curious. She had Thomas's eyes and my stubbornness, which was a combination that made the toddler years challenging and the preschool years delightful. I went back to work when she was 6 months old, part-time at first, then full-time by the end of the year. I had built a client base doing independent brand strategy, and I had been careful to maintain it through the pregnancy. The work was mine. I had built it myself. Thomas had been promoted to VP by then. More travel. More evening events. The kind of schedule that requires a household to adjust, and ours did. I hired a part-time nanny for the days I worked. I reorganized my client calls around Lily's schedule. I became, in the language of households that don't have enough hours, the primary logistical parent. That was a choice. I made it because I could, because my schedule was more flexible, because I wanted to be home with her in a way that was genuine and not guilt-driven. I do not regret that choice. What I did not see, inside that choice, was the slow reorganization of what Thomas and I were to each other. The way that a marriage, when it becomes primarily logistical, when the cocoa vin Sundays become rare and the kitchen becomes a place where you pass each other and report on schedules, can lose the very thing that held it up. I told myself it was a season. Lily was small. The career was demanding. We would find our way back to the kitchen Sundays. We didn't. The first time I felt something was wrong, I was 33. Thomas had been traveling more than usual. A new client, a significant one, that required quarterly trips to their Chicago office and occasional overnight stays for pitch preparation. He had explained all of this early on, thoroughly, in the way he always communicated logistics. Thomas was good at logistics. What made me stop on an ordinary Thursday evening was not anything he said. It was something he didn't say. He came home later than expected. I was in the living room with my laptop when he came in. He set down his bag, kissed me on the top of my head the way he always did coming home, and went to the kitchen to find dinner. And I looked up from my laptop and noticed for the first time that he had not asked how Lily's day was. He always asked. Every evening for 6 years, the first question through the door was, how is Lily's day? Not how was your day? Hers. Because she was small and her days were specific, and he liked the specifics. He had not asked. I told myself he was tired. The Chicago client was demanding. He had a lot on his mind. I went back to my laptop. But I filed it. The second thing was 2 weeks later. I was looking for a phone charger in his jacket pocket, the kind of ordinary domestic rummaging that happens in households where objects migrate without announcement. I found a receipt. A restaurant receipt. 2 people. Dinner. A Tuesday, 3 weeks earlier, when he had said he was working late. The restaurant was 40 minutes from his office. Not the kind of place you go alone. I looked at the receipt for a long time. Then I put it back where I found it. I was not ready to know yet. I want to be honest about that. There is a period before certainty when you can still choose not to look. I chose not to look. Not forever. Just not yet. I needed to think first. The thinking took 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, I paid attention in a way I had not been paying attention before. Not surveillance. Not checking his phone or reading his emails. Just watching. The way he held his phone differently now. Face down on surfaces rather than face up. A new habit that had arrived without explanation. The way he would occasionally come home with a quality of energy that was not quite the tired from work energy I knew. Something more contained. Like someone who has been somewhere alive and has come home to something slower. A new cologne. Not dramatic. Just different. He had worn the same one for 4 years. I had bought it for him twice as a Christmas gift. The new one arrived without comment. Small things. Each one individually nothing. Together they assembled into a shape I recognized even though I did not want to. On a Sunday in March, while Thomas took Lily to the park, I sat at the kitchen table and said out loud, to no one, to the empty kitchen, he's having an affair. Hearing it outside my head was different from carrying it inside. It became a fact rather than a suspicion. I needed information before I could decide what to do with the fact. I did not hire anyone. I did not need to. What I needed was already accessible. I simply had to be specific about where to look. Thomas used a shared family calendar for scheduling. He had set it up years ago, an organizational tool, and we had both used it so completely that neither of us thought about what it contained anymore. I went through 3 months of his calendar entries. There was a pattern. Every 3rd week, sometimes every other, a block labeled client dinner. A restaurant, occasionally. A wine bar twice. Once, a hotel bar that I recognized because we had celebrated our 5th anniversary there. I cross-referenced the dates with his credit card statements, which I had access to because I handled the household accounting. The charges were consistent. Always under $200. Always at places nice enough to be intentional. I had a name within a week. Not from his calendar. From his phone contacts, which I had accessed because I needed to call someone on his behalf when his phone was the nearest device and I had known his passcode for 4 years, and he had never changed it. Lauren Briggs. I had seen her name flash on a notification once, weeks before, and set it aside. Now I looked for it specifically. Lauren Briggs was a senior account manager at a firm that worked with his. I found her on LinkedIn in 3 minutes. Professional photo. Bright smile. 32 years old. I looked at her photo for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. I did not confront Thomas. Not that day. Not the next day. I had a plan to make first. I want to stop here for a second, because I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you confront him immediately? Why did you wait? And I want to answer that honestly. Lily was 6. She was in the middle of first grade. She had a teacher she loved and a best friend named Priya and a routine that held her world in place. I was not going to blow up her world on a Sunday morning because I had found a name in a phone contact. I needed certainty first. I needed information. I needed, most importantly, to know what I wanted the outcome to be. And here is what I decided in the weeks between the Sunday morning in March and my daughter's birthday in June. I was done. Not emotionally. I had not been emotionally done with Thomas for a long time, not until that Sunday at the kitchen table. But I had said the word out loud to the empty room, and something had clarified. A marriage is not only a feeling, it is also an agreement. And he had broken the agreement. I was done. But I was going to be done on my terms. Not in a screaming match in our kitchen. Not in a tearful confrontation that he would manage and explain and minimize until I was apologizing for checking his calendar. On my terms, which meant with an audience, which meant a specific audience. Lily's 7th birthday was in June. We had been planning the party for weeks. Unicorn theme, her request, delivered with the absolute certainty of a child who has thought about nothing else for 2 months. Pink and purple. A piñata. 20 guests. A cake from the bakery on Elm Street that she had chosen herself from a catalog. Thomas had been enthusiastic about the planning. Attentive in the way he was attentive to things involving Lily, which had always been genuine, and which I noted with something complicated, because the parts of a person that are good do not cancel the parts that aren't. I ordered the cake. Or rather, I ordered 2 cakes. Let me tell you about the original cake first. Lily had chosen a 3-tier unicorn cake with a rainbow interior, pink fondant exterior, gold horn. The bakery had a photograph of it in their catalog, and Lily had pointed at it without hesitation and said, "That one," with the look of a child who has just identified something that belongs to them. I ordered it. I paid for it. I confirmed the pickup date. Then I called the bakery 3 weeks before the party and asked if they could also make a second cake. Same size. Different decoration. The woman at the bakery, whose name was Janet and who had been doing this for 15 years, said, "Of course. What would you like on it?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you okay, hon?" I said, "I will be." She said, "I'll make it exactly as you described." The second cake was also 3 tiers. White fondant exterior. No decorations except for the message written in neat black script across the top tier. I won't tell you yet what it said. You'll find out when Thomas did. I want you to understand what the 6 weeks between March and June were like. Because they were not easy. Carrying knowledge that the person across the breakfast table doesn't know you have is its own particular weight. I had been through something similar with Brianna. Different circumstances, different stakes. But the same fundamental experience of knowing more than you're supposed to know and having to decide how to carry it. I had gotten better at carrying it. I continued our mornings the same way. Coffee. Lily's school run. His calendar reviewed together over breakfast because that had been our habit, and abandoning it would have signaled something. I continued our evenings. Dinner. Lily's bath. The conversation that happened mostly in the kitchen while one of us cooked and the other kept Lily out of the way. I watched him. Not with the desperate searching attention of someone hoping to be wrong. With the settled attention of someone who knows the answer and is watching for something specific. I was watching for whether he would bring her. I had learned from 3 months of careful observation that Lauren Briggs existed in a separate compartment of Thomas's life, the way the affairs of men who consider themselves careful always exist in a separate compartment. Work events were work events. Our life was our life. The two did not overlap. The birthday party was technically a family event, not a work event. But I had noticed something in April. Thomas had mentioned, twice, that Lauren was great with kids. Once at dinner, conversationally. Once when I mentioned we needed to finalize the guest list for the party. He had not suggested inviting her. He would not have been that direct. But he had mentioned that she was great with kids. Twice. I knew what that meant. I did not say anything. I nodded and continued the conversation, and inside I thought, he's going to bring her. He's going to bring her to our daughter's birthday party and introduce her as a colleague, and I'm going to stand in my backyard and smile and shake her hand and pretend. Unless I don't pretend. The Saturday before the party, I drove to the bakery and picked up both cakes. The unicorn cake went in the refrigerator in the large box, just as planned. The second cake I placed in a smaller box and carried to the car and drove to my friend Cassie's house and asked her to keep it in her refrigerator until Sunday. Cassie had known about the affair since April. She was the only person I had told. She had listened carefully and then asked me 3 questions. Did I have documentation? Did I have a plan? Did I need help? I said yes to all 3. When I handed her the box, she opened it and read the message on the cake. She looked up at me. She said, "Diana." I said, "I know." She said, "This is either the best thing I've ever seen, or you need to give me 5 minutes to talk you out of it." I said, "You have 5 minutes." She didn't try to talk me out of it. She put the cake in her refrigerator. Sunday, June 14th, Lily's 7th birthday. I was up at 7. Lily was up at 6:45 because she had been awake since 5, vibrating with the specific energy of a child on the most important day of the year. She came into our room and climbed into the middle of the bed and said, "It's my birthday." Thomas said, "It is. Happy birthday, Bug." She said, "Are all the people coming?" I said, "All 22 of them." She said, "And the unicorn cake?" I said, "The unicorn cake is in the refrigerator." She accepted this information with the gravity it deserved and went to put on the tutu. The morning was ordinary. Thomas made pancakes, Lily's birthday request, with strawberries cut into hearts because he had always done that on her birthday since she was 4, and she counted on it. I set up the backyard. Pink tablecloths. Balloons. The piñata that Thomas had hung from the oak tree the evening before. Plates with unicorn print that Lily had chosen at the party supply store. At 10:30, Cassie arrived with the second cake box and put it directly in the kitchen without Thomas seeing. He was in the backyard with Lily. I put the second box on the dessert table under a white cover at 11:15, while Thomas was helping my mother set up the seating area near the back of the yard. Then, I put the unicorn cake in the refrigerator. I took a breath. I was ready. Guests started arriving at noon. Lily's preschool friends and their parents. My sister and her husband. Thomas's brother Kevin with his wife and 2 kids. My parents. Cassie and her husband Marcus. Friends of ours. People we had known for years, who believed, because Thomas was good at his compartments, that our marriage was exactly what it appeared to be. 40 minutes into the party, Thomas came inside. He said he needed to check something on his phone. He was in the kitchen for 8 minutes. When he came back, he was alone for approximately 3 minutes. Then the front door opened. Thomas crossed the backyard toward the door with a particular walk of someone who has calculated this and is now executing it. Easy. Unhurried. The walk of a man who believes he has managed the situation. He came back through the sliding door with Lauren Briggs beside him. She was smaller in person than her LinkedIn photo. Dark hair. Good clothes. The expression of someone trying to look at ease in a situation that required effort. He put a hand briefly on her back as they came through the door. The touch was half a second. Gone before anyone who wasn't looking for it would have noticed. I was looking for it. He brought her over to me. "Diana," he said, his voice warm and easy. "This is Lauren. She's a colleague. We were just finishing up some work things, and I thought she'd like to see the party." Work things. On a Sunday. At noon. On his daughter's birthday. Lauren smiled at me. The smile was nervous underneath the ease. I smiled back. I said, "So glad you could make it, Lauren. I've heard so much about you." Her smile flickered. Just slightly. The way a light flickers when there's something wrong with the current. Thomas said, "Can I get you a drink?" He steered her toward the drinks table, and I stood in my backyard for a moment and breathed. My mother appeared at my elbow. She had been watching from across the yard. She said, very quietly, "Is that who I think it is?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Diana." I said, "I know. Give me 20 minutes." She looked at me for a moment. My mother, who had been married to my father for 38 years and who understood something about the long arithmetic of marriage. She said, "What happens in 20 minutes?" I said, "The cake." I want to stop here right now, because I know some of you have already figured out what was written on that cake, and some of you haven't yet. And I want you to know that whatever you're imagining, whatever you think I did, what I actually did was more specific and more carefully thought through than you might expect. Because I had 6 weeks. And I had documentation. Type 1 know what's on the cake in the comments if you think you figure it out. And stay with me. Because the 20 minutes before the cake are as important as the cake itself. Lauren Briggs moved through my party. That's the only way to describe it. She moved through it with the careful attention of someone who is trying to do something well. She smiled at the children. She admired the decorations. She said something to Kevin's wife that made her laugh. She was good at this. I had to grant her that. Thomas stayed near her. Not obviously. Not in a way that anyone who didn't know would notice. But I watched the geography of where he was in the yard, and Lauren Briggs was always within 15 feet. My father watched me from his seat near the garden. My father had been a quiet man for 70 years, and quiet men observe. He had met Thomas 40 times or more over 7 years, and he watched Thomas, now the way men of his generation watch things they suspect and do not name. At one point he came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there. Then he said, "Your mother says there's something happening with the cake." I said, "There is." He said, "Do you want my advice?" I said, "What's your advice?" He said, "Make sure Lily isn't watching when it happens." I looked at him. He had put it together in an hour of observation. 70 years of watching things quietly. I said, "I've already arranged it. Cassie is taking her to the bathroom to wash her hands at the right moment." He said, "Good." He went back to his seat. Cassie came to find me at 1:30. She said, "Ready?" I said, "Yes." She went to find Lily. I walked to the dessert table. I had not told the other guests what was happening. I had told 4 people, Cassie, my mother, my father, and my sister. Enough people to ensure the moment was witnessed, and not enough to make it feel like an ambush organized in advance, even though it had been organized in advance. The rest of the 22 people in that backyard were about to experience something they had not anticipated. I lifted the white cover from the box on the dessert table. I lifted the lid. I carried the cake to the center of the table where everyone could see it. Then I said, loud enough for the yard, "Time for cake." The moment a person sees something they weren't expecting, there is a pause. A fraction of a second where the brain is processing and the body hasn't caught up yet. You can see it if you're watching for it. I watched for it. 22 people moved toward the dessert table with the particular momentum of a group responding to the word cake at a children's birthday party. Easy. Anticipatory. Thomas moved toward the table. Lauren beside him, slightly behind. My mother and father, from the left side of the yard. Kevin and his wife, from the seating area. The other guests filling in around the edges. And then the pause. The white 3-tier cake in the center of the table. Neat fondant. No decorations. Just text, written in careful black script across the top tier. 5 lines. Thomas, Lauren says you told her we were already separated. We are not separated. But we will be. Happy birthday, Lily. 20 people read it. I watched them read it. Thomas went still in a way I had never seen from him. Not angry still. Not defensive still. The particular stillness of a person who has been in a car accident and has not yet understood that it is over. Lauren made a sound. Small. Barely audible. The sound of someone who has just understood something. Thomas's brother Kevin said, "Thomas." His voice was low. My mother stood with her hands folded in front of her. My father looked at the cake and then at Thomas, and did not look away. The other guests were in various states. Some of them were still reading. Some had already read, and were looking between Thomas and Lauren, and me. 2 of the other mothers had moved slightly closer together the way people do in the presence of something significant. Thomas said my name. Diana. I said, "There she is. Your work friend." He said, "This is not. You can't. At Lily's party, Diana. You did this at Lily's party." I said, "You brought her to Lily's party, Thomas." I just provided the cake. Kevin said, "Oh my God." Lauren had stepped back. 2 steps, 3. Moving toward the edge of the group in the way of someone trying to find the way out. Thomas's voice had changed. The management quality was gone, the smooth, easy control he had always been good at. What was underneath, it was something more unsteady. He said, "You want to do this here? In front of everyone?" I said, "You made that choice when you walked through the front door with her." Kevin's wife was at Kevin's side now. She had her hand on his arm. Thomas looked around at the yard, at the people he had known for years, at his brother, at my parents, at the guests who had no context for any of this and who were witnessing the complete reorganization of their understanding of this family. He looked at Lauren. She said very quietly, "I didn't know." "He told me." "He said they were." I said, "He told you we were separated." She looked at me. Her face had changed completely from the easy warmth of an hour ago. She looked like someone who has just understood how the situation they are in was constructed, who built it, and what they actually are inside it. "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry." I genuinely didn't. I looked at her for a moment. I believed her, which was its own complicated thing to navigate. I said, "I know." Thomas said, "Lauren." She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not anger exactly. The particular expression of a person reorganizing. She said, "You told me you were separated." He said, "I can explain." She said, "You brought me to your daughter's birthday party. You introduced me to your wife. You put me in this room." She picked up her bag from where she had set it near the drinks table. Thomas said her name again. She didn't look back. The party continued. I want you to understand this because it is the part that required the most from me. Lily came back from the bathroom with clean hands and Cassie at her side and found the backyard in a state of unusual quiet and her father standing near the dessert table with an expression she had never seen from him. She looked at me. The way small children look at their mothers when the air in a room has changed and they don't have words for what they're feeling. I went to her. I crouched down. I said, "Hey, Bug, ready for your cake?" She said, "Is Dad okay?" I said, "He's going to be okay." She said, "Is the cake the unicorn one?" I said, "There's been a slight mix-up with the cake. But you know what? I have a solution." Cassie, who had been ready for this, came through the kitchen door with the unicorn cake. 3 tiers, pink fondant, gold horn, rainbow interior. Lily's face. She said, "That's the cake." She said it with such absolute certainty, such perfect 7-year-old joy, that several people near me laughed. The real kind. The releasing kind. I lit the candles. We sang. Thomas stood on the far side of the group with his brother Kevin's hand on his shoulder. He sang. His voice was slightly off, but he sang. Lily blew out all 7 candles. She got her wish. She wouldn't tell me what it was, which was correct, because that's how wishes work. The party ended at 4. Guests left with the careful warmth of people who have witnessed something significant and are extending extra kindness as a result. Thomas's brother Kevin was the last to leave. He hugged me at the door for a long time without saying anything, and that was enough. Thomas was in the kitchen when I came back inside. He said, "I don't know where to start." I said, "I do." I handed him the folder. The same approach my mother had used. The same approach that had worked in a living room when the subject was a necklace. Specifics. Inside the folder, dates, locations, credit card charges, calendar entries. The pattern of 3 months organized and printed and placed in clear sequence. Not for a courtroom. For this kitchen. For this moment. For the specific purpose of making it impossible to manage or minimize. He went through it slowly. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you known?" "Since March," I said. He said, 3 months. "Yes," he said, "and you didn't say anything." I said, "I wasn't ready to." And then I was. And then it was Lily's birthday. He looked at the folder. He said, "She didn't know about you. About us." I told her we were separated. I know. I believed her when she said that. He said, "That's..." He stopped. I told her we were separated because I didn't want to. I didn't want it to be what it was. I said, "But it was what it was." He said, "Yes." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. I said, "I want a divorce." He said, "I know." I said, "I want it to be organized. I want Lily's life to be as undisturbed as possible. I want you to be her father, fully, the way you have always been her father. That does not change." He said, "Okay." I said, "My attorney is Margot Fields." You'll hear from her on Tuesday.
He said, okay.
I said, one more thing.
He looked at me.
I said, the Coke oven sundaes. I missed those.
Not at the end.
But in the beginning. I want you to know I missed them. He looked at me for a long moment. He said, I miss them too. I said, I know. I took the folder off the counter and went to check on Lily, who was in her room with the birthday presents organized into categories the way she always organized things, and who looked up when I came in and said, was that the best party? I said, that was the best party. She said, the cake was good. I said, which one? She thought about it.
Both, she said.
But the unicorn one was better. I sat on the floor of her room, and she climbed into my lap with the unself-conscious weight of a 7-year-old who still fits, and we sat there in the middle of her organized presence, and I held her, and did not think about anything for a while. The divorce took 8 months. Margot Fields was thorough and fair and moved at a pace that was faster than Thomas had expected and slower than I sometimes wished. We were organized about it. The word organized kept coming up in those 8 months. Thomas had always been good at logistics, and in the end, the logistical skills he had used to maintain a separate life were the same skills he applied to dismantling it cleanly. He moved out in September. An apartment 20 minutes away. Close enough for Lily. Far enough for me. Lily saw him every other weekend and every Wednesday evening for dinner. She accepted the new structure with the specific pragmatism of a child who has good adults around her and knows it. She cried once, in October, the first overnight at his apartment. She called me at 9 p.m. and said she missed me, and I said I missed her too, and we talked until she was ready to sleep. She was okay. Children, when they have enough love and enough consistency, are more resilient than we fear. I was okay too. More than okay, in the specific way of someone who has put down a weight they had been carrying for 3 months without fully realizing how heavy it was. Lauren Briggs called me. Once. 2 weeks after the party. I almost didn't answer. I did answer. She said, I want you to know I ended it. Immediately. After the party. I said, I know. Thomas told me. She said, I want to say I'm sorry. Not as an excuse. Just that I'm sorry. I said, I believe you. She said, the thing he said. About being separated. I said, I know. She said, I would never have. If I had known. I said, I believe that too. A pause. She said, you planned the whole thing. I said, I did. She said, the cake. I said, the cake. Another pause. She said, for what it's worth. You handled it better than I would have. I said, I had 6 weeks to prepare. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. We didn't speak again after that. But I thought about her occasionally over the following months. Not with anger. With something more like recognition. She had been in a situation constructed by someone else and had not known the full shape of it, which is a particular kind of being used that I understood from different angles of my own life. I hoped she was okay. I think she was. I am 36 now. Lily is 8. She is in 2nd grade with a teacher she loves less than her 1st grade teacher and a best friend who is still Priya and a talent for organizing things, her toys, her schedule, her understanding of the world, that I recognize as her father's organizational mind wearing her face. She has started asking for the Coke oven sundaes. Not by name. She doesn't know the history of it. But she has started asking on Sunday afternoons if we can cook something complicated. Something that takes a long time. Something where she can help. Last Sunday, we made beef stew. It took 3 hours and came out slightly wrong in a way that was completely right. She declared it the best thing she had ever eaten. I have a new apartment on the west side of the city. 2nd floor. A kitchen with room for 2 people. A spare room that Lily has decorated to her own specifications. Purple walls, bookshelves, a desk by the window where she does her homework when she stays with me. I work 3 days a week from the kitchen table and 2 days from a shared office space downtown. My client base has grown in the last year because it turns out that when you are no longer managing the emotional weight of a compromised marriage, you have considerably more energy for work. My parents come for dinner on the first Sunday of every month. My mother sits in the same chair each time, and my father helps Lily with the things she is trying to learn, currently how to tie a bow on a gift without it falling apart, which he has perfected over 70 years of wrapping presents and is patient about teaching. Thomas is a good father. He has remained a good father. We are organized and civil, and occasionally warm in the specific way of two people who shared something real and then had to figure out how to share something smaller. He has never explained the Lauren situation to my full satisfaction. I have accepted this. Not every question gets a complete answer. Some things you carry with the partial knowledge you have and make peace with the gap. The cake photograph circulated. I knew it would. Cassie's husband had taken a picture without my knowledge, the moment the cover came off the box, and it eventually found its way to a small group of mutual friends who found their way to a slightly larger group. I was asked about it directly by 3 people. To each of them, I said the same thing. I had 6 weeks, I had documentation, and I wanted to be honest about what was happening in my own home. Nobody asked follow-up questions. I want to say something before I go. There is a version of this story where I am the villain, where I chose a public moment for private pain, where a child's birthday party became the staging ground for a confrontation that could have happened privately, quietly, with fewer witnesses and less cake. I have thought about that version. I have sat with it honestly. Here is what I know. Thomas had been managing 2 lives for months with the full use of his considerable organizational skill. He had told the woman he was seeing that we were separated. He had brought her to our daughter's birthday party and introduced her as a colleague. He had planned to stand in my backyard and smile and let that be the story. I did not create the public moment.
He did.
The moment was already there, already constructed, already in motion the second he walked through that front door with Lauren Briggs. I simply made it legible. I did not put a screaming accusation on that cake. I put 5 lines of fact. Specific, verifiable, addressed to the person they concerned. Thomas, Lauren says you told her we were already separated. We are not separated, but we will be. Happy birthday, Lily. No names called. No cruelty. Just the truth, written in neat black script, placed in the center of a table where 22 people could read it. And Lily was washing her hands. Lily did not see the cake. Lily got her unicorn. From a psychological perspective, what Thomas did over those months has a name. It is called compartmentalization, the cognitive process of separating conflicting realities into sealed categories to avoid the discomfort of the conflict between them. It is extraordinarily common in people who consider themselves good people and who find the gap between their self-image and their behavior too wide to hold consciously. The compartment allows them to be, in each space, exactly who they believe themselves to be. A good father in one room, something else in another. The compartment works until someone opens the wrong door. I opened the door with a 3-tier cake on a Sunday in June. Not out of cruelty. Out of precision. There is a difference between revenge and honesty. Revenge is about causing pain. Honesty is about making something visible that has been hidden. I was not interested in causing Thomas pain. I was interested in the truth being seen. By the people who knew us. By the woman who had been told a lie about the state of my marriage. By Thomas himself, who had, I genuinely believe, convinced himself that the compartment was holding. The compartment was not holding. The cake said so. If you are in a marriage where something is wrong, where you are carrying knowledge that the person across the breakfast table doesn't know you have, I want to say this to you carefully. You get to choose your moment. You get to choose your method. You do not have to explode immediately or absorb indefinitely. You can think first. You can prepare. You can make sure that when the truth comes out, it comes out in a way that you can live with. Document everything. Know your worth before you need it. And choose the cake carefully. That's my story. Now I want yours. Have you ever had a moment where you had to decide whether to let a lie continue or make the truth visible? Have you ever prepared for something for weeks because you knew it was coming? Tell me in the comments. Type 1 swap the cake, or I chose my moment. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And if someone in your life needs to hear this one today, send it to them right now. Thank you for being here until the very end.